Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Calvin, absolutely fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Guy, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I'm actually anticipating having you as the 100th episode. That's how excited I am.
Really? No, that's quite something. Wow.
I know. Well, I've been building up to it and I thought, who's the right person? And I think it's you. And we'll get into that as to why. But
you know, I respect that as well, because I get invited onto a lot of podcasts and quite a lot of people invite me on before they've even launched a podcast. And I think they think, we'll get someone with a bit of a profile, it will help boost the pod. But it doesn't work like that. The way to grow a podcast, as we were talking about off air, is through consistency, keeping it going and building an audience. And so I respect that you've managed to get to 100. That's quite an achievement.
Well, I go down that. I mean, most people will know who a Joe Rogan is in the terms of being awesome podcaster. And of course, I'm a minnow compared to his gargantuanness in terms of what he's achieved. But I do just kind of, on a very minor note, when somebody says to Joe Rogan, do you ever pause and think about what you've achieved? He goes, no, because if I do, it'll frighten me. Yeah. Even when I get to 100 episodes, I kind of think, don't look at the numbers, don't look at the stats, just keep going. Don't worry about it. But so listen, here we are. And Calvin, I do know who you are, as I'm sure many people will, but there'll also be some people that don't. So it'd be great just to get from you. You're at a party and somebody says, so what do you do? How do you answer that with the broad spectrum that is you?
I've always struggled with that question, but I usually say I'm an Anglican deacon and a TV/radio presenter.
And even that is this great combination of just, it's not like fish and chips, it's like fish and ice cream. They're two.
I see them as one of the same because it's all about ministry. I've got my parish ministry and my public broadcast ministry.
Brilliant. So on that note, I would love to know, because you are... there are personalities, there are characters in this world, and we've just been talking about Pulp Fiction off air, as we do. And there's a fantastic scene in it where Mr. Wolf says to the lady whose scrapyard they're using at some point, just because you are a character doesn't mean you have character. And that's one of my I love, as we said, many moments from that film. But I think you have character. And I say that as an observer without, obviously being around your house for tea. So I would like you to bring to life, what does, call it a week, call it a month, but what does your life look like? And I think that will set context that we can then have some conversation about.
It's very strange. And I don't know what I'm doing day to day without my calendar. I live by my calendar. So if something's not on it, it doesn't exist to me and I won't be there. If it's on it, I will be there. Today, I've got a podcast with your good self. I'm talking to one of my former students afterwards who wants to use my church for a venue for something. I've got another podcast, and then I'm on GB News this evening. But the rest of the week, I've got different things. I've got in my calendar notes to pray for people who are going for bishops' panels who want to go for ordination. I've got tomorrow evening an evening session in my church with Lectio Divina, where we're going to go through the Bible in some exegesis. I've got a conference on Thursday, which should be really good. It's the Reasoned Conference. It's specifically aimed at students, but the panelists who I'm up with is such an amazing group. So I'm looking forward to the conversations that come out of that. And I've got an evening prayer session on after that as well on Thursday. Friday is my sermon writing day. So I'll be writing my sermon. I'll be choosing hymns and the mass setting for Sunday. And I've also got a lecture because I'm continuing my theological studies, as one should do as a cleric. And I've got leaving drinks in the evening, but that is just one random week. Every week is different. Saturdays I'm on with Nana Akoya, and Sunday is obviously I've got church in the morning, and then in the afternoon I've got my show, the Common Sense Crusade.
Well, I think there's quite a lot there that we can have a little bit of a go at. But just before we do then, Calvin, just walk me through that. How did Calvin get to where he is today? What was that stepping stones that took you to this place that you now inhabit?
A shift in focus, a shift in perspective. And I say this to a lot of people. You mentioned Joe Rogan never stops to think about what he's achieved. And I'm the same in that sometimes people say you've got a bit of a profile or you're well known in this area. And I honestly don't focus on that. I don't take it in because I'm constantly working on my ministry and constantly working on building my platform for my ministry, but never for the ends in and of itself. And what I mean by that is people say things like, well, how do I get to write for the Telegraph or the Daily Mail? Or how do I get my own TV show? How do I X, Y, Z? And they look at my milestones as goals in themselves. I find it very, very strange. And I was like, well, if you want to write for the Telegraph, get writing. But they're like, can you introduce me to someone and this and that? It's like people always want to skip to the end, but always the end is the focus. And I find that very sad because, when I do anything that I do, I'm always at least trying to do it for the great glory of God. And I got to where I am through writing, prolifically writing about what I was seeing in education, because it hurt me, what I was seeing, this indoctrination of young people, and I wanted to make people aware of it. So I wrote about it, not to become a well-known writer or not to get in certain papers, just because I thought it was important to do so. And I think that's what people need to focus on. Focus on your mission, and the platform comes as a result. If you focus on the platform, you're looking at the wrong thing. And I say this to all these young people that are obsessed with how many followers they have or how many likes and retweets they get. It means nothing. I continuously, every year or two, I wipe my Twitter, for example, get rid of all the tweets, and because you get stuck in, oh, that one's got 1 million retweets, way. But it's like, it's not important. These things are distractions, and it's the mission that should be at the forefront of our minds, and everything else falls into place. I think that was a bit of a tangent. You asked me how I got where I am, but that's the advice I give. But how I got where I am is just through writing and through caring about certain issues, and eventually people started to notice and ask me for my opinion on those issues.
So I do hear some stuff there about focus on the message and become maybe not an expert at it, but put your energy and your effort into knowing and understanding and creating output. And there is a bit of a build it and they will come, I think, there, which is if you've got something to say that people actually want to listen to, if you've got a platform that's big or got that capability, but actually you haven't got anything to say, then the reality is it going to work? Cabin, how did you grow up? How did you move into that ministry space? What is it that took you down that road?
Well, I grew up in the Midlands, in Mansfield, Nottinghamshire, Robin Hood country.
I used to live in Bilsthorpe.
No way.
Yeah.
This is the thing. When I first moved to London a long, long time ago, I used to say, from the East Midlands somewhere. I never used to say specifically, but because I thought no one's going to have heard of Mansfield. Whenever I do, everyone's heard of it for some reason or another, which I find strange. It's a former miners' town. It's a market town. Not much happens there. But it's a place, outside of this bubble of Westminster where people still believe in community. And growing up, community was important. My mother always had around our table Labour politicians, Conservative politicians. She'd have the head of the local football team, the head of the local rugby team. She'd have all of these so-called important people. She'd be bashing their heads together and making sure that they're working for the community. Like, she'd arrange litter picking sessions and get everyone out there, with litter pickers, making sure the streets are clean. Or she'd make sure that there were enough bins, like really basic stuff, but so important for the local area. Like having that pride in your community and being part of something bigger than yourself, but also bigger than your own personal politics, was always something that was important to my mother. And I think I grew up around the idea that conversations should come from both angles, and it shouldn't just be your own perspective that you're listening to. And she was great at that. So that probably has something to do with my interest in politics, at least. We were planting trees from the moment we could walk, and my mum ran community centres and that kind of thing. But I didn't get involved in politics myself until quite late, and I got involved through local residents' association first and foremost, campaigning actually firstly to get rid of the horrible buses going up and down the high street. And people won't think I'm the most green person ever from a lot of the things I say, but having those constant buses going up and down full of pollution with no one on them, it just didn't make much sense. So we petitioned to get more greener buses and actually to try and cut down on the number of ghost buses. That was my first taste into politics, and I realised very quickly when we were petitioning, actually I think it was against Boris Johnson at the time, so again it wasn't party political, that to get anything done you needed to get closer to the source. And that's when I started to get into more party political issues, and eventually became a campaigner myself, and then stood for office in certain roles. But all whilst doing that, I was maintaining my writing and getting on with focusing on the issues themselves and trying to spread awareness. And I suppose that's the political front, and then the faith side of the story is a whole other journey.
And is there a synopsis on that said that's when I realised that was a path for me?
The synopsis would be that I was, after uni, I entered industry, loved industry, but it was very superficial and it wasn't fulfilling. And I realised quite quickly that this is not how I wanted to spend my life. When I didn't want to spend it chasing money, and I didn't want to spend it just getting drunk and having fun. As great as that sounds, it's soulless. And I looked at a way of, I hate the term giving something back because it sounds really pompous, but I wanted something more rewarding from life, I suppose.
More nourishing.
Yes, spiritually nourishing. And through that, I became a teacher, and that was the start of my vocation, the start of my calling. And upon entering teaching, I further discerned and further explored my calling and realized that I was supposed to be in ordained ministry. And this is something that God had been nudging me towards for a long time. And it was great when I finally acknowledged that and spoke to the church about it. And they also saw that calling and acknowledged it. And then I went towards training, and the rest, as they say, is history.
And can I ask a naive question here? When somebody makes that decision to go into the ministry, is it college? Is it university? Is it a dedicated space that you go to? I literally, I'm not sure of that entry route.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. If it was up to me, everyone would take a residential route, and that's the way it used to be. You'd go to a seminary, like a theological college, and you'd spend 2 or 3 years there with other people also training. And that, I think, again, it's rooted in community. And the one that I went to Oxford, St. Stephen's House is the name of the college. And every day was rooted around prayer. So we started the day 7:30 with morning prayer. We ended the day at 5:30 with evening prayer, and everything else fit around that. And I think that's important, to start off your ministry, fitting your life around prayer rather than trying to fit prayer around your life. But these days, anyone can get into ministry, any route. They've lowered the expectations and the standards. You can just do an evening class a couple of times a week and get ordained. And I think that's to our detriment, really.
Over what period of time would that be?
Well, it depends on your age. The older you are, you can do these things in a year. I don't know how much of a theological backing you can get doing a few evening classes in a year, to be honest with you. I think that's probably got something to do with the state of affairs that we're in today.
So interesting. I teach martial arts, and in traditional martial arts, it takes a minimum of usually 3 to 5 years before you can get a black belt, and sometimes some systems it's 10 years. In the last decade or so, there's been a change where some people, it's for the money, they run courses where you do an 18-day course and you're an instructor. I get them come along to instructor training for what I do, and they really try and hold space with people that have been doing it for 10 years or for 20 years, and just even though the will, the motivation to a point may be there, the endurance, the insight, the tenacity, the resilience, all those things. The discipline, thank you, Rome. Yes, that's an even better word. The discipline isn't there. And that's probably true regardless of content or context. It's just whatever discipline you're going into. So I recognise that. That's something I can talk about for some time, which is another podcast. But there we are, you see. There's a few topics here, and I think one of them then is, and I don't know if they're the same thing, but Common Sense Crusade, which I also hear you talk about education and indoctrination and these kind of things, and it's a big sphere. But maybe we kick on that first, which is you were a teacher, so you've got insight. You're not just talking about it as an observer. So I think there's a credibility piece there. I understand that. So what have you seen that is giving you red flags? What are you seeing that says, listen, this may or may not even be about faith. This might be just about what is inherently right or wrong. Now, I can possibly attach faith to it. I just wonder if you could plot that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, I just released a documentary with the New Culture Forum called Heresies. I think it's episode 10 on this issue of indoctrination in schools. And I gave a little bit of my perspective, but I also interviewed teachers, parents, governors, and looked at the political statements and really stretched this out for parents, because the biggest thing I've come up against so far is parents saying, well, it's not happening in my kid's school. And that worries me, because how do you know? And when I say this, what do I mean? There are so many things happening, but it's all down to the critical theories. It's all down to neo-Marxism that has infiltrated our education system.
So this is critical race theory when you say critical
theories in general. So critical race theory, gender theory, queer theory, it's all from that same Frankfurt school of thought where critical theories came from. in Europe before it went to America and then back over to England. And what it does, it undermines our very way of life, because that's what Marxism is all about. It's essentially, just to break down one element of this, telling young people that they can decide their gender other than the gender that was assigned to them at birth, completely mitigating the biological fact that people are born either male or female. I'm not going to debate the idea that, different people can have different perspectives on whether they are a man or a woman, but the idea of male and female is a biological fact that we used to always be taught in science. And now we're seeing that the curriculum has been shifted so rapidly to take on board these contested ideologies that what they're doing is, well, for example, in the UK and in English schools, the sex education has moved from secondary school down into primary school, and we're having lessons for 5-year-olds about, stimulating body parts, essentially teaching young kids to masturbate. And all of this comes from these theories, and people don't always put 2 and 2 together, and people don't always see the breadcrumbs. So my journey has been laying that out for them and saying, look, this is what's on the curriculum. This is what your kid might be being taught. Just ask your school. Ask them, what are they teaching in RSE, PSHE, citizenship? And what we found is a lot of parents have come back and said, well, the school aren't going to say. Their school have said they can't share what they're teaching. That should be a red flag right there. No school should ever say, we cannot tell you what we're teaching your child, because the school is there to be supplemental. It's there to support the parent, not to replace them, and certainly not to replace their values or ideology.
I've got 2 boys, one's 10 and one's 8, so this is a prime time for their education. There is something there about, number one, if you said to me, Guy, do you pay attention? Then the answer would be no, not really.
Well, we trust, of course we do.
Yeah, and that's because at 53, I'm referencing school through the lens that I experienced, not the one that's current. But I'm also on social media, and I know a lot of people my age that aren't, and they don't look at TikTok and they don't look at this kind of stuff. And I don't look at TikTok. I look at TikTok because every now and then it's amusing. I primarily look at TikTok as a way of taking a pulse on the world and understanding what my 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old will be viewing, and the way that 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds are experiencing life, and the way that those in their early 20s are, I guess, offering their truths into the world. Social media will either tell you that the world is full of puppies or Armageddon is tomorrow, but the full reality of watching social media does make me go, there's something, not in all schools, but schools are at risk, dependent potentially on maybe the council that's in or the party that's in, and maybe the history that goes with it, but there are risk factors there. So that asking and saying to a school, I would like to understand the curriculum. I would like to understand the content. It's not available online, is it? It's you think actually this is our curriculum. There it is for the year. Just cop onto the website. Yeah. Those are the lessons we're covering.
There should be transparency. There should be. And we're seeing a lot of pushback at the moment around copyright, because schools have been told they've got to teach relationship and sexual education, which is the new sex ed, RSE, at quite short notice. So not being subject matter experts in this, because most teachers train in a specific area, they've recruited external agencies into schools, and up until recently that has been mostly Stonewall and Mermaids, who, as we know, are very politically ideological organizations. And what we've seen is that these organizations have said to schools, you cannot share our resources because that would break our copyright. And schools have taken that quite literally and said, parents, we can't show you the content we're teaching your child because it would break copyright. And of course, that's nonsense, because it's not about, there's no commercial competition going on there. Parents aren't going to
use it and propagate it.
It's absolutely just an excuse being used to block off parents. But then we're also seeing some schools go further than that and say to teachers, you must call this child by his or her preferred pronouns and not tell the parent about this. So it's undermining parenthood and parental responsibility and authority. And that is very dangerous. That is essentially grooming.
Again, I'm interested in, my 10-year-old would look at a teacher and go, what do you mean? I'm obviously a, and then he would announce he, because in his world, it's that simple. I can wrap my head around a child that if off their own back, they were having that conversation internally and they wanted to be identified in a certain way, that's a different conversation, which again, I'm not going to get into now. But I think what I do observe and fear, possibly more in the US than in the UK, but what happens there comes here, and I'm sure it exists here, is where teachers have an agenda that may not be Machiavellian in the context of their predators, but their ideology is the Machiavellian element, where there's a vocabulary and an intent to challenge children to think in a manner that they would actually offer as being the wrong way of thinking, which is what they've learnt at the home, and to take on board this centralised view that they're offering. That's the bit then where I go, it's not about you indoctrinating, it's about you guiding and allowing them to live with multiple truths, etc. So, yeah, when you said that it's worse, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in America, at least, parents are fighting back. Over here, parents don't recognise that it's happening yet. So that's the first bit. But when I say it's worse, I mean it's worse than ideological teachers. It's worse than activist teachers, because I imagine they are still in the minority. But why it's worse is because it's all about the activists infiltrating schools. So I did some polling when I was part of a think tank to find out what is being taught in schools. And we discovered that the vast majority of schools are no longer using textbooks. So it's very difficult for them to show you and say, here, this is what we're teaching. What they're doing is they're downloading resources off the internet. And the biggest, most popular teaching resource website is called the TES, which used to be the Times Educational Substitute. And I know this website, I've used it myself. And what teachers do is they download resources, they may edit a few things, then they go and teach this in class. And especially when teachers don't have any subject matter expertise in an area, they'll download the resources. And we found that, I think it was about 70% of classes were being taught resources downloaded. And then so I looked at the resources on TES, and the vast majority of them were infiltrated already with ideologies. So what the activists are doing, they're not necessarily in the classrooms. They're infiltrating the resources that teachers are downloading, whether the teachers are activists or not. They're then teaching these things which are contested and telling kids about white privilege and that if they are black they are oppressed, and pushing this critical race theory nonsense, because it's very it comes from a good place, but they don't realise that they're undermining our way of life, and they're undermining parents at home, and it's all very toxic and divisive.
And I think I am quite fascinated by, when I hear you talk about that, is, I don't quite know how to maybe verbalise this, but is the fear, potentially, of pushback in those spaces. And there is this phrase, talking truth to power. And it seems to me that you believe what you believe, and there are those that don't believe, but probably have a sense of fear of being alienated, isolated, vilified within their own community. And in that respect, I think it sometimes gives a sense that there's more people believing in things than there are, because many stay quiet. And I wonder if you have that experience of people saying, I wouldn't dare bring it up.
Yeah. Peer pressure plays a large part in this, both in the adults and the pupils. In terms of the pupils, we now have, you'll go around the class and let's announce our pronouns, he, him, she, her, etc., etc. And then it gets to the pupil that doesn't feel the need to announce their pronouns, and or maybe not want to, but of course they're going to, because they're going to feel that peer pressure, and that's what you have to do. We see the same with the adults. At the end of the email signature, the teachers now put she, her. It's like, well, I know, Karen, that you're a she, her, because your name's Karen. You don't need to announce your pronouns to me. But by doing that, what they're doing is making people who don't do that feel ostracized and pushed out. And in order to feel more inclusive, they're actually excluding people. But the hypocrisy isn't always evident. But you're right, there are lots of people that go against this, or would want to stand up against it, but daren't and won't, because they don't want to stick their heads above the parapet.
Inclusivity in that context is quite interesting, if it's inclusivity in the sense of as long as you agree. So if inclusivity is complete disagreement is also palatable, then that's inclusive, right? But actually, if you don't agree, actually, by definition, not inclusive. And it's an argument that kind of wins itself, but it's a bit like saying that table's got 4 legs, that dog's got 4 legs, therefore that dog's a table. You go, well, yeah, if that was actually true. But it's such a false logic that in some respects it seems to hold weight with people. And I'm fascinated by a lot of the arguments that I see, like the Matt Walsh thing, which is the moment, which is, what is a woman? And his absolute struggle to get that question answered. Because in the answering of it lies the ridiculousness, I guess, of the situation that some people are in.
People don't want to be rude. People don't want to hurt each other. Of course, people are going to be careful and tread on eggshells. But at the same time, we all know what a woman is. Everyone knows what a woman is. Even toddlers and babies know the difference between a man and a woman. They can't articulate it. Of course they can't, but they can tell you the difference. They know that's mummy, that's daddy. They know that's a man and that's a woman. But the problem we have is we're breaking down this idea that there is a universal truth, and we're giving people ownership of their own truths, and that's pushing us away from the Enlightenment. I'm not a massive fan of the Enlightenment myself, but we've been saying for years and years that the Enlightenment is what makes us better now than our forebears, and if we're pushing in the opposite direction, surely that's a bad thing. But the thing I don't understand yet is that, people, detractors of mine, people who say that my views and opinions are outdated or bigoted or whatever, they're welcome to that opinion, that's fine. But I don't see them ever question, but what if he's right? Or what if I'm wrong? That's the problem I think I'm struggling with at the moment. Because yes, we've made a lot of progress in lots of ways. Over the last 100 years, we've made more technological progress than we have in 1,000 years. Like, things are moving at a rapid pace. But that doesn't mean that we're making moral progress or ethical progress. But we always assume that we are, and we assume that progress is linear. I don't think it is. I think there are ups and downs, peaks and troughs, and we make mistakes, and sometimes they get corrected. We've seen empires rise and fall continuously over mankind's history. I think we might be at the fall of Rome in the Western society at the moment. I feel that. I might be wrong, but what if I'm right? What if what we're doing now is harmful to the next generation? What if we're making a massive mistake? Surely we owe them a duty of at least asking that question.
At one level, I don't think you even have to be right. I think you have the right to be heard in a manner that you would give to anybody else. So I think that's my first stepping stone. I'm always intrigued now by this cancel culture and this absolute desire to damage by people that are talking about inclusivity and equality and fairness, and yet they punish at a rate which is very considerable. I saw a T-shirt once that said, as I have tattoos, and it said, do you know the difference between somebody with tattoos, without tattoos? And then on the back it said, the person with tattoos doesn't mind that you haven't got any. It's that kind of attitude that says, well, your belief is your belief. That's fine, but it's when you try and force it as an agenda, because we're never going to get to a nirvana where we all believe the same thing and we all like the same food and we all like the same look, and that's a given. But actually, we seem to have fallen out of love, or maybe we should head towards that, enjoying the differences. Tolerance is an interesting word, but enjoying the fact that Bob likes anchovies on his ice cream. In terms of ideology, it doesn't matter how bonkers it is, as long as it's just yours and then it doesn't damage outside of you. I can agree with it, I can disagree with it, but if I try and take it further by cancelling you from work, damaging you on social media, punishing you in ways, that's when I think I see something that sits beyond even the argument. There's something about the nature of the human being. I believe the most important thing to protect is the quality of the conversation and the willingness to meet in the middle and be curious and to try and understand and almost enjoy the differences. But there's no enjoyment of the differences. Dependent on your view or your perspective, people almost aren't willing to spend time with you or know you, or, well, if that's how you think. I don't know if you see that or experience that, or even your thoughts on that.
I think everything has been sensationalized to the point that, you said we should all have different views unless something is harmful to other people outside of that. But I think we think everything is harmful at this point. I personally wouldn't want to put pronouns in my social media bio. I wouldn't feel the need to. I think it's quite obvious that I'm a man, and I think there are only men and women. I don't think there are other genders. So therefore, I wouldn't have a need or a want to express that. But I wouldn't take issue with someone else that does. However, the people that would put their pronouns in the bio, whether they believe that it's inclusive or whether they are, thinking that they are non-binary and outside of the traditional spectrum, therefore need to proclaim their pronouns. What I find most often is those people take issue with me not, and think that my not is harmful to them because I'm not being inclusive. And it's like, my belief structure isn't harmful to yours because it doesn't affect you unless you make it so. Like, just as yours could affect me if I made it so. But we don't meet in that common ground, and it's all sensationalized. Everyone thinks that everything is the most important issue in the world these days, and it is a dividing factor. And I think a lot of this came from Brexit. I do. I voted leave, and I campaigned to leave the European Union for a lot of reasons. But what I did not expect is the idea that people I've been friends with my entire life would cut me off because I thought differently to what they did over a very political issue. And that has been getting worse ever since that vote, I think.
See, that's fascinating. I think it's like relationships or marriage, right? If you don't enjoy the lunacy of the person that you're with, it's probably not going to work. They leave all the lights on in the house when they go out, and you come home and every time all the lights are on. If that winds you up, it's not going to work. If you go, right, I wonder how many of the lights are on, you can see a joy in it. If I'm for Brexit and you're not, I would still want to sit across with a curry and a glass of whatever is our favoured beverage, and me look at you and go, you're bonkers, you are. And you go, I'm bonkers. And we can still be great friends because the discussion is in the middle, but the humanity is still there.
Even if you don't take joy in it, even if having the lights left on annoys the bejesus out of you every single time you get home, you still appreciate the other things, like you get to watch Game of Thrones together, or she cooks you a lovely meal. Like, there are things you do appreciate, even if there are things that you cannot find joy in. And it's about addressing that balance, isn't it?
So I think, to me, the arguments are the arguments because they will ebb and flow. I think what I'm almost more worried about is the reaction of people to other people's opinions, insert opinion here, and that reality of we can't even be friends or we can't communicate if you hold a different ideology or a different perspective than me. And that's because, and I think I heard you say this, is it's almost as if the thinking now is that your opinion now is damaging, rather than just an opinion. If you don't agree with me, it's not just so much that we don't agree. I think I heard you say, no, you're damaging the world, you're damaging society, you don't value me. And it almost becomes the other side is attacking. And I think that's what I heard you say there.
Yeah. And the irony is that thought process is damaging. And unless we get away from that, we are going to become more divided, because we will never, like you said, we'll never reach a nirvana where everyone agrees. It's just not humanly possible. We've never been in that. I don't think we've ever had a society like that. So we're just going to get pushed further and further apart. And if the small issues keep becoming bigger issues, eventually, where does that end up? Civil war. I mean, it sounds hyperbolic, but that's the natural conclusion of things. If we can't live together, if we can't find common ground over things that are trivial, eventually we fall out over something that's big.
Moving along to GB News, I know you were on it as a guest for some time, and sort of that there was a natural transition there, and you have to go, right, I'm about to go and do this, or actually, no, that's completely within your purview. I know I'm asking a question I've already got the answer to, by the way.
No, it's good. So I've been involved with GB News since before it launched, because I used to go on talk radio a lot as a contributor. And a lot of the good hosts from talk radio were going over to GB News, and they invited me to be part of that process from I was going to say day one, but before day one. So I was there for the rehearsals and helping them get things ready, the formats ready for their show. And then I was a regular contributor for the first few months. And then there was a change in leadership, and a really good guy took over, and he said, why has no one ever asked you if you wanted your own show? I was like, I don't know. And we had a conversation about it, and we signed up, and this was a year ago now. So my show's been a long time coming, but we made an agreement, and I agreed to come on for 1 day a week. I was offered different things. Would you do, first of all, to get some experience, I did 2 weeks every weekday for 2 weeks, and that was entertaining, but not something I'm looking
to. I do remember seeing you a lot, and then
just to get the screen time and to build up some experience. I had that, and they offered me a weekend show, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I said, look, I'm not looking to become a TV presenter. This is not a career goal. Again, going back to the start of our conversation, but I do want to use the platform to spread the good news and to proclaim the truth as best I can. And I'd love to have a faith show, or a show centered on current events, but from a faith and family perspective. And they said, okay, what about Sunday morning? I was like, well, where do you think my audience is going to be on a Sunday morning? So we settled for Sunday afternoon, and I got the 2 till 4 slot. And we launched 5 weeks ago now as we record this, and it's going quite well. It's going, for the first few weeks I beat Sky News consecutively. So ratings wise, it's going good, and social wise, we've got a video up that by the time this goes out will have reached 3 million views on TikTok. And again, I agree with you. It's a toxic, horrible platform, but I'm using it to kind of. I'm trying to flood it with an alternative narrative to what I see as a cultural subversion that's going on TikTok. But yeah, I use my show as a platform, not for me, but for the truth, and B, for the wider, to make clips for social media, to get things out there and get conversations heard that wouldn't necessarily be on TV. For example, in my last show, as we record this, I started with a conversation on abortion. And I'm avidly pro-life. I think the sanctity of life is the most important thing in the world. So I wanted to talk about that, and I ended the show with a prayer, and I don't think you see many mainstream outlets that will end with a prayer these days, or even have a prayer on television these days, other than maybe songs of praise. Just doing what I can with the platform that I've been gifted, and making sure that I always remember. I mean, we all have to humble ourselves and tone down our ego and stuff. But I always try to remember at least that this is not for me. This is for the good news, and I'm gifted this platform as long as I'm proclaiming the good news. And if I ever overstep my mark, it will be gone. And I think that's the same with all platforms. People often say it's great, you've got 200,000 followers on Twitter. It's like, yeah, but that could be gone tomorrow, and it most probably will be at some point. So I don't rely on it, and I don't celebrate it, because it could be, taken away from me at the blink of an eye. It's not about me.
So this is about ministry.
Yeah, it's all about ministry.
And do you ever, I don't know what the parameters are for being on television, but do you have a sense of, in regards to those that maybe look to you, who are observing you and maybe even monitoring you, the church or outside of the church, do you have an inbuilt radar of best not, or do you go, no, as long as I believe it and I'm saying it with elegance, I am prepared to face into that truth and I will verbalise it? I just wonder how you balance these things.
Not within the church. So my bishops are fantastic, and I had the best theological training you can get in this country. So I like to think I've got a decent foundation, and I won't step into heresy, and I try not to anyway, and I won't be vicious or vindictive.
That's not who you are.
Right. So I don't get in trouble from the church, and I think I would have done if I got ordained within the state church. I think that would have been a battle against wokeness constantly, because I think wokeness has taken hold of the state church, unfortunately, over theology. So that's not an issue. My only issue is political. I have to play by Ofcom's rules, and Ofcom is a political body, although it's supposed to be an independent ombudsman. Throughout the pandemic, we saw they changed their guidelines that stated you cannot question or undermine public health bodies in this country. I find that very, very troubling. The idea you shouldn't be able to question a public health body. Of course, you should be able to question them always. Undermine them during a pandemic, I can kind of see where they're coming from with that, but question, I found very troubling. A different organisation that I worked at, they wouldn't let me talk about vaccines on the show at all, which is why I no longer work at that organisation. But the one that I'm at right now, I've had some pushback on certain topics, but for the most part, they've been really, really good.
So what I also notice is on platforms like Twitter, with vaccine commentary, people are just being cancelled and taken off. And now we're finding, of course, that a lot of the queries around what some of these organisations have or haven't done or haven't tested, and some of the, I guess, can seen as conspiracy thinking, is actually already coming forward as, well, actually, it turns out that they hadn't tested it in that way, or it turns out that actually the deaths have increased, or actually, what happened to the good old flu? Where's that gone? There are lots of things that come out like that.
Guy, pick up a dictionary from the 20th century, and you'll look up coronavirus, and you'll see, a common cold. And if you look at vaccine in those dictionaries, you'll see it's something that provides immunity, which is something that the COVID jab doesn't really do. And then, of course, we've got the news that they never tested it for transmissibility, even though politicians and mainstream media are pushing that this will stop you spreading it to other people. It's like, well, how will it if it's never been tested for transmissibility, for transmission rates? There's so many questions there, but for something so important as life and death, we should always be able to ask questions. And the fact that big news corporations didn't ask the questions, and social media and big tech companies shut people down for asking questions, we've got a lot to look forward to in terms of independent tribunals and investigations. And so many politicians need to be held to account for the approach throughout the pandemic.
So your position in that ministry space is one of more than just somebody who has a job in an organisation. You're representative of many things that it stands for, which is care and humanity and having a sense of, I talk about contribution when I'm working with teams. I talk about the willingness to help others outside of your own need, which is, in essence, I think, where are you coming from? So you could, if you stayed local, we wouldn't know you probably. We wouldn't hear anything from you because you'd just be working at that local level. So there is something about that willingness to stand and hold space when you know you're putting yourself in some form of risk, I guess. So I applaud that. Again, it doesn't matter if I agree with you or disagree. That's not about what this is about. I think it's the willingness to hold space. And I talk about leadership of self. And leadership in self is to have a sense of your own identity and to hold space on it, but to calibrate to make sure that you're that you're not fooling yourself. So I guess I wonder how you calibrate, because it's easy.
Yeah, that's this thing.
Boom. Okay. Right.
As long as I'm sticking to this, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is why I don't mind sticking my head above the parapet, because we're called to, well, quite literally to martyr ourselves for the faith. So if a modern day context, that means your Twitter account gets closed or you're no longer allowed on TV, it's not a big deal compared to what the fathers of the church went through, who literally laid down their lives for the faith. I think it's a small ask that we're called to do these days, which is why I get really frustrated when people do stay quiet, to do stay safe, or people say, well, when I just get this next job or this next promotion or just get over this hurdle, then I'll be able to. It's like, no, you won't, because there'll always be another hurdle. If you're not willing to proclaim the truth now, you never will be able to. So just do it. Stand up for the truth and die for the truth. That's what we're called to do as Christians, really.
And do you have other people within the ministry that are seeking your advice and your counsel about maybe finding their own voice? Because you have a confidence and an eloquence around you that works for you, and for others maybe it will be if they can find it, or they've got it but maybe they don't have the confidence. They're very knowledgeable on their topic, but they maybe just don't have that presence yet. So do you ever have those kind of conversations with those that are looking to be more than just in their local area, and they not so much be you, but they want to have an impact? Do you get approached for that?
Of course. And first of all, I'm still involved in the local area. I still have my local parish church. I do the day-to-day stuff on the ground as well. I think that helps, that anchors me. But yeah, I have those conversations all the time with people, and I find it difficult. I suggest people, refer back to this, go read the gospel, pray on it, and because people can't follow my path. I'm not very good at, I'm not very diplomatic, I don't think. I'm not very good at saying something and meaning something else. I just say what I think. And sometimes people take offense to that. Sometimes people find strength in that. But I'm not very good at packaging things up in a pretty parcel. You know where you stand with me. I'm, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. But not everyone can do that. And I respect people who are able to put things in a pretty package, because it actually helps them get further down the conversation quite often. And it helps them get into certain places where they need to be having the conversations. It helps people become ministers and stuff like that. So I don't ever advise people follow my path, but I suppose praying and discernment and remembering to stick to the mission and stick to the truth as the core, rather than, again, the platform or their end goals that they've got in mind.
So do you have a strategy? Do you have if I see you in 5 years?
Oh, gosh. No, not at all, guy, not at all. Gone in those days. I literally just try to walk through the doors that God opens for me. And sometimes that's very difficult. When I just finished my ordination training at Oxford, and I'd got everything lined up for me in the Church of England, and it was snatched away like that. That was heartbreaking to have this idea that perhaps I wasn't going to be involved in parish ministry. I'd already got my platform in media, but I thought I was called to parish ministry, and to have that snatched away, it was like, oh, okay, so maybe I was wrong on that. But then another door opened, and I walked through it, and I now have my parish ministry, and it's actually worked out better for me, because I don't have that woke battle within the church that I would have had. So these things always happen for a reason, and we can't see them at the time necessarily, because we're not as zoomed out as God is. But He has a plan in store for us, and it's trying to always have faith in that plan. And when I say I walk through the doors that God opens for me, I don't want that to sound arrogant, because as in, we also have to work towards something. We have to contribute. We have to be active. I'm not saying we have to be passive in our lives and then God takes care of everything, but we have to have our ears to the ground and at least look for the door to be opened and then walk through it. So we can't just wait for everything to be done for us, but we've got to contribute to our lives too.
Well, if we make movement, ripples happen and people pick up on those, and then they maybe approach you. So I'm just alert to time. That's snatched away from you. Physically taken, suggested that you move on? Again, I do know the answer, but just to hear you bring that to life would be worth just understanding that. Yeah,
it's not clear cut, because the bishops within the Church of England are very political. They're very good at that thing I was just talking about, in saying one thing and meaning 10 other things. You never get a clear yes or no. So I was never told that they weren't going to ordain me. I was never actually rejected. I ended up leaving because the plan that they'd put in place for me had fallen through, and there was no plan to replace it. So they wanted me to hang around in this limbo forever. And that's how in industry it would be seen as constructive dismissal. But in the church, you're not actually an employee. So you don't have employee rights, and there's no tribunal or anything. It's a very antiquated system because it's been around before we had employment rights. But essentially, I'd finished my training, I'd succeeded at everything, passed everything. I had a parish lined up. I had met the priest, met the congregation. The bishop had approved it. All the boxes had been ticked except the paperwork hadn't been filled in, and I'd been told to postpone the announcement. And this went from a short term to an indefinite amount of time. And essentially, they constructively got rid of me to the point that I had to say, look, okay, this is clearly not going to work. You don't want me here for political reasons that they hinted at but never made explicit. So I was like, okay, it's time to call it a day.
Well, listen, I applaud you. I applaud your tenacity, and I didn't bring you on to agree or disagree with you. I brought you on because I think you're a value in the world, and I see you adding value. I do admire tenacity, and I do admire people that are clear about what they're about, regardless of what my thoughts and opinions on that are. So I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. If people wanted to find out more about you, to connect with you, what's the best way of doing that, Calvin?
calvinrobinson.com. All my socials are on there. I've got a Substack that I've started now. If people want my email address or my postal address or whatever, it's all out there. So
sure. Okay. Well, I'll put that in the write-up that I do as well. So listen, just from me, Calvin, thank you. You're so gracious finding the time. The world of Google exists for people that want to know more and see more, but I think this is a great introduction to that.
I should say, Guy, I'm terrible at self-promotion. I should say Sundays 2 till 4 on GB News, Calvin's Common Sense Crusade.
I would definitely watch it. Well, I do watch it when I'm around, so I think it's really valuable, and I think you add great value in it. So listen, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to get you hold on for a few moments just while everything loads up. On that note, from me to you and those that are listening, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.